If you read any of the unionist newspapers in this country, I suppose in Scotland that means if you read any newspapers, because they're all unionists. And I'm talking here about the Record and the Sun and the Herald and the Scotsman, not about the Glasgow International. But if you read any of those unionist newspapers, you'll very quickly come across a headline and a story that claims support for Scottish independence has fallen and opposition to Scottish independence is increasing. In fact, I read one report just recently that said this year alone there's been 3 successive opinion polls which showed a widening gap between those who opposed Scottish independence and those who supported it, so that they claim there's now nearly twice as many Scots opposed to independence as there are supporting it. And that's what they're trying to claim. And the campaign's hardly started and they're saying it's all over bar the shout at this stage. But if that were the case, and I don't think it is the case, but if it were the case, you would then expect the No campaign, or to give it its Sunday name, the Better Together campaign, to be in something of a political high. And you would think that their chairman, the head of the campaign, the ex-chancellor Alistair Darling, would be able to play the role of the statesman, hovering above the political fray, relaxed and confident, and almost certain about what the outcome will be in 2 years' time, with a massive no vote being registered by the people of Scotland. And yet that's not what's happening. There was the same Alistair Darling, only last weekend, delivering a memorial lecture in East Lothian and launching a vitriolic attack against the very idea of Scottish independence. An independent Scotland that chose to keep the pound, in his words, would sell itself into serfdom. He warned the Scots that if they went down that road, the independence they would get would come attached with all kinds of political strings, and in particular, impossible economic conditions placed upon a fledgling independent Scotland by the rest of the UK, who would resent their Britain being torn up, broken up. He even went so far as to argue that we would become culturally isolated from the rest of the island by independence. The way he put it was to say British music would be no longer our music. This isn't such a bad thing when you think it's But at the same time, listen to what he's saying. And this is not a man who's confident and relaxed and certain about what the outcome of this campaign is going to be. This is a man that's increasingly worried and anxious and even frightened about what the outcome of the campaign is going to be. And he's not alone. I mean, I was in Westminster for 14 years as an MP. And what I remember from my time down in Westminster was that on the very rare occasions when Scottish business managed to get onto the floor of the House, the chamber emptied, its MPs flew for the exits, including a significant number of MPs who nominally were there to represent Scottish constituencies. Westminster wasn't interested in Scotland. In fact, Scottish affairs hardly registered in the consciousness of MPs in the 14 years that I was in Westminster. And compare that to today, completely transformed. The Scottish Affairs Select Committee has got a 10-to-1 unionist majority on it, has announced not one but 2 separate inquiries into Scottish independence. I think it's the Environment and the Climate Change Committee, or the Energy and Climate Change Committee, has its own separate inquiry into Scottish independence. The Defence Select Committee has got an inquiry into Scottish independence. The House of Lords Constitutional Committee has already produced an inquiry report about how the agreement between the Scottish and UK governments won't work and will be open to challenge in the courts, because everybody in Westminster suddenly can't stop talking about independence. And of course we have the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition up and down here to Scotland like a couple of unionist yo-yos, and every time they come up they're giving us dire warnings about what will happen if we dare to go down the independence road. They've even resurrected Gordon Brown, who popped up at the Edinburgh Book Festival to warn everybody with doom-laden way that it isn't going to work and we shouldn't even consider trying it. And the reality is Westminster's paying attention because Westminster's frightened of what the outcome of this campaign could actually be. And it's the same with the print media, which is south of the border. The Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail and the Daily Express and the Guardian and the Independent and the Times. Suddenly they've all rediscovered Scotland. Scotland is something which interests them. One week they're telling us that Scotland will become a haven for tax dodgers if we become independent. The next week they're telling us that higher taxes in Scotland will drive the tax dodgers south of the border and nobody will stay here to be in this country at all, and so on and so on. And the British establishment, which normally tries to give off an air of confidence and certainty, that this 300-year-long union is going to go on for another 300 years is in fact running scared of the prospect of Scottish independence. And I think they've got every right to be scared, because the next 2 years are of immense importance to the people of this country. It will affect every single one of us what the outcome of this debate will be. One Scottish newspaper put it very well, I thought, recently, when they said that this independence campaign is the most important political fight in the United Kingdom since the Irish War of Independence. And remember, at the time of the Irish War of Independence, Britain was a much stronger country than it is now. The Britain of today doesn't have an empire any longer. Britain itself, the British state, has been in economic and political decline since the 1970s. The fact that there is a Scottish Parliament and that there are assemblies in Wales and Northern Ireland are signs not of Britain's continuing strength, but of Britain's gathering weaknesses. Britain only gave us devolution to see off Scottish nationalism. It failed miserably to do that. And now the fight for Scottish independence is on, and the British establishment are not confident that they can win that fight. And we have to take great heart from that. But if we're going to win the fight, then we've got to get our strategy and our tactics absolutely spot on. And right from the outset, we have to be very clear, I think, in our own minds about what kind of country Scotland is in the 21st century, and about what kind of people constitute the Scottish nation in the 21st century. We are not only a nation of very different cultures and ethnicities and belief systems, we're a nation that's proud of that diversity. William McIlvenney, the Scottish writer, got it absolutely right when he said Scotland was a mongrel nation and proud to be a mongrel nation. I see it in my own family. My daughter-in-law's born, raised and educated in Thailand. She's now a UK citizen living around the corner here in Glasgow. 3% of the Scottish population come from backgrounds like hers. My wife is English, born and bred. My mother-in-law is English, born and bred. They've lived here in Scotland for 20 years, 30, 40 years in the case of my wife. 8% of the Scottish population is just like them. Even amongst the white majority population like myself, we're not all the same. I mean, I still continue to identify very closely with my Irish grandparents and great-grandparents who first came to this country at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Like them, part of me will always be Irish, but I'm also Scottish, proud to be Scottish, and I'm also British in some sense as well, because I was lucky to be part of that baby boomer generation that was born into a post-war British state which had the welfare state, national health service, free education, and which gave me the life chances that I got. I would never have gotten except for that kind of Britain, and we should never lose sight of that. Don't knock Britain all the time. There's good things, used to be good things about Britain. And of course I'm a European, just like everybody else on this island. And what I'm trying to say is that if we base our tactics, this campaign for a yes vote, on what is a very narrow definition of Scottish nationalism, then we're going to fail, because the majority of the Scottish population are non-Scottish nationalists. We have to convince them to vote yes by giving them reasons to vote yes. We've got to have to convince them that if they vote yes, their lives will begin to change. That it will make a real difference to how they live in the 21st century here in Scotland. And independence, you see, will only be worth a candle to the majority of Scots who we want to vote yes, if we can convince them that independence will change Scotland from the kind of country that it is now into the kind of country that it can yet become. And that's why I'm mystified by the SNP strategy. I share many of your criticism of the way the SNP are trying to run this campaign, and I don't say this in a very critical fashion. I say it in a hopefully helpful fashion. If you try to secure a yes vote by presenting a yes vote, it's not really changing anything, then why would people bother to vote yes at all? If it's not going to change everything, why vote yes in the first place? I mean, we've spoken about it this evening already. Why vote yes to stay in NATO? Why vote yes to remain a part of a global war-fighting machine led by the United States of America? If you vote no, you get exactly the same thing. Why vote yes to keep the monarchy? I mean, why remain subjects rather than citizens in our own country? If you vote no, you get that anyway. I mean, I know there's going to be a written constitution, and it's somewhere inside that written constitution the SNP have said there will be a line about only the Scottish people are sovereign inside an independent Scotland. But how can the people be sovereign if they already have another sovereign reigning over them? It doesn't make any kind of sense. What happened to we'll make this land republican when the Scottish break away? That's the kind of stuff we should get onto the streets with, that people will begin to hear and to listen to and respond to if we get it just to be right. Why vote yes to keep the same anti-trade union laws that we have in the rest of Britain? They'll have to change. If they don't change it, I don't want to see an independent Scotland where the trade union laws are just as bad as they are at the moment in Britain. Why vote yes to the same big 6 energy companies with a stranglehold over our electricity and gas supply? Why vote yes for privatised rail franchises, a deregulated bus system? All of that's got to change. And we've got to convince people that it will change. And it will change with independence. And that's the kind of message we have got to go out there with and say that a successful campaign for a yes vote in 2014 will have to offer hope to people that their lives are going to be changed dramatically by voting yes. Otherwise, why should we bother at all? You know, last week's Guardian newspaper, the Society section, which had a major article inside it, which went under the heading, "What's Wrong with Glasgow?" And when you read the article, it dealt with the shocking mortality rates that Glasgow has. The death rates from cirrhosis, drug abuse, lung cancer, murder and suicide are not only the highest in Britain, they're the highest, amongst the highest in the whole of Europe. And the same article spoke about Scotland being in the middle of what it described as being in the grip of a public health crisis that's gone on for decades. The Scottish people were described as unhealthy and short-lived, and Glasgow was described as the ground zero of Scotland's national health crisis. Now that's the reality of Glasgow as part of Britain, but you won't hear anything about that in the Better Together website. There'll be no mention of those harsh statistics on that website at all, nor will there be any mention in unionist politicians' speeches or reports about that kind of Glasgow. They won't talk about the unemployment rate of over 8%, except insofar as they try to blame the Scottish government for that, while ignoring the reality that all the real levers of economic power remain at Westminster. They won't talk about the fifth of Scottish children that still remain trapped in poverty. They won't talk about almost 1 million Scottish households that are officially categorised as low income. They won't talk about the more than 500,000 workers we have in this country that don't earn a living wage yet. And they won't talk about 1/3 of our households being fuel poor in a country that is rich in energy resources. All of that will be ignored. Now, we can and should blame Britain for all of that. But at the same time, if we can't convince the voters that all of that would change in Scottish independence, then we're not going to win a majority vote on that one either. One of the big problems, I think, that comes with being part of Britain and the European Union is that they all share this neoliberal consensus. All of them actually believe, all the political parties, and I have to include the SNP to a large extent as well, they believe that the way forward, the model for economic development in this country is to have low taxes, to have deregulation, to have privatisation, and that by doing all of these things will attract foreign inward investment into the country, and that will get the economy going, the economic growth going, and everybody's going to benefit from that. But of course, there is another model which is not like that. Not every country in the world uses that model, and one of the countries that doesn't is a country very like Scotland, which is Norway. Norway has it's #1 in the United Nations Human Development Index. It's got life expectancy rates, literacy rates, standards of living, which are the envy of every other country in the world. And Norway has achieved that by not being part of the neoliberal consensus. Norway has achieved it by going its own way. Norway's not in the European Union. Norway's not part of the euro. It has its own currency. Norway doesn't believe in low taxes and deregulation and privatisation. Norway has a high taxation system, and it uses the revenue from those high taxes to invest in the infrastructure and to create a welfare state that all of the people can actually enjoy. Why can't Scotland be like Norway? Why can't we at least debate that Scotland can be like Norway? And that's, I think, what really worries me about this debate, is that there's been so many missed opportunities so far to make this debate really resonate with ordinary people in the street. For example, I'm not an economist, but even I can see that we need a wider debate about whether Scotland should stay in the euro or become part of the pound or stay with the pound. Why not debate whether Scotland should have its own currency? At least let's talk about it. At least let's say what might happen if Scotland went down that road. Let's have a debate about it. Let's not reject it out of hand without even thinking anything about it. And why don't we challenge this neoliberal consensus? As part of the independence campaign, why don't we put that right at the front, that the Scotland we're talking about is not going to be their Scotland or their Britain or the kind of country that they've been used to. Ours is going to be very different. Why don't we do that? And why don't we raise issues like public ownership? I mean, if neither the coalition government or its new Labour opposition know how to run a privatised railway, why not bring the railways back into public ownership? Why let the big 6 energy companies away with it? Why not bring them back into public ownership and make that part of our campaign? And how can we sit by and say that we can't afford child benefit and housing benefit when we're wasting billions on the obscenity of Trident and billions more in fighting global wars on behalf of the United States of America? It's obscene. And we should be making that at the very heart of our campaign. And I'll finish with this. People always say, I'm a socialist and an internationalist, I don't believe in nationalism. That's nonsense. I think it was Jimmy Reid, the late Jimmy Reid, who pointed out you can't be an internationalist unless you're a nationalist first. The two things go together. Nationalism and internationalism are part of the same thing. They're not opposed to each other in any sense whatsoever. But this debate matters, and it matters desperately to ordinary people. And we've got to make sure that ordinary people hear what we're saying about it, we the socialists are saying about this debate. Because this is a debate that will change all our lives, that will actually determine who and what we are for the next period and maybe for the rest of our lives. And therefore we've got to make sure that when we get to the end of this debate, that we've explored every avenue, we've gone down every question, we've thought about everything, we've argued about everything, because this is our debate. It's not their debate, it's not the Parliament's debate, it's not the SNP's debate, it's the people's debate. And unless we debate with each other, we're not going to get to the right decisions. But I think we will get to the right decision. The more we have meetings like this, and the more we don't depend on the television, and the Sun, and the record to make to form our views for us. Thanks very much.